We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are continuing our SEC football schedule previews. Today, Blake, we get to the Auburn Tigers, and that is a program where things are never boring.
No, never boring. Certainly wasn't a boring off season by any means. Probably won't be a very boring season either when you look at their schedule. I think it's pretty interesting kind of how their schedule plays out, which obviously we'll talk about. But yeah, won't lack excitement. I'll say that. But it will be an interesting season for Auburn for a lot of different reasons. So
SEC Shorts, which does brilliant work, made a documentary on Auburn, I think last year, and they called it, I think, the Auburn Experience. It was a roller coaster ride. I mean, that's what this program is. You go back and you look at the end of last year where Auburn lost its last 5 games. You almost had a coup to overthrow the coach and make a change after a year. You almost forget when you're in a down cycle that Auburn's in that, look, you go back to 2017, this team went 7-1 in the league and lost a rematch to Georgia in the SEC title. At Auburn, it just seems it is feast or famine. And I think this year's schedule will have a lot to contribute to that too, Blake.
yeah, I mean it is an interesting one because I think we always say this in the SEC, but I think it's like there's always a wide variety of outcomes for certain teams. I mean, not for every team. I mean, there are teams, as we know, are going to win pretty much every game they play, and obviously, I don't think Auburn, this team is there at that point. We're just going to look up and down the line and say, all right, well, they're guaranteed to win all but one game or something. Like there's a lot of those games I think you're going to look at here, and really it is like it's an interesting schedule. Like we start here at the top. Who is it? There was someone else we did on the schedules where it's like, and you've kind of been used to this with some of the SEC teams, but they're not leaving the state until October.
Yeah.
It's not happening. Like they're going to play a lot of these games here early, and I think that's going to give them an opportunity. And we've seen other teams benefit from this over the years. I think back to even like what was it? There was a team like Vanderbilt. What was it? Maybe mid 2000s, somewhere near the bone. Those Bobby Johnson teams where they just opened like their first 5 or 6 games were all at home or something, and it allows you to really kind of to build up some of that momentum early. And when you look at this here, I mean, you've got Mercer, San Jose State, Penn State, Missouri, LSU. I don't think Auburn's winning all 5 of those, but it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting to think about some of these. No one like the Penn State one. That's certainly a very intriguing matchup to have, as your 3rd game of the season. But it's a Jordan Hare. It's the same thing with LSU, a team that is in, I don't know if in transition is the right word, but it's like they have a new coach. There's going to be some things early on they're trying to figure out. So I think that's something, because when we get to the next part of the schedule, there's going to be a lot more, to really talk about. But these first 5 games, look, I mean, and we'll go in and have our game by game predictions and all that before the season. But right now, if you ask me, I don't know what that record looks like in those first 5 games. It's just, I think there's such a wide variety of the way things could play out here.
Well, for an overview, Auburn, I am looking at various computer polls that I trust. Auburn has got an average ranking of the ones I've looked at right now, which is about 6 or 7. I say computers. That also includes Lindy's and Athlon's and Phil Steele. So it's not just computers, but I guess credible power rankings is a better way to state it. Auburn checking in right now around number 25. And look, you talk about schedule being favorable. I wouldn't say that Auburn's is, but first 5 games at home, certainly Auburn in a situation where you're Bryan Harsin, you do not want things to implode early. Yeah, because of the way last season ended. So I think that sets up favorably. I'm not going to say Auburn is going to be favored in all 5. I don't know what the line will be on Penn State. Penn State is ranking higher in most polls that I see, but that game is in Auburn. LSU, another one, kind of a mystery. That could go either way. But Auburn could conceivably be favored, albeit in some cases very slightly, in its first 5 games, and then road trips to Georgia and Ole Miss. It probably will not be at that point. But let's pull back up the schedule again and talk about some of these. Mercer is Auburn's opener. And Auburn, let's see, Mercer, for an FCS team, pretty tough matchup here. I'm seeing them picked 17th in Athlon's. So not a pushover of an FCS game there, but not a guaranteed win either. One Auburn should win, but it's not going to be the rollover that Alabama State was a year ago. Then San Jose State, averaging right around 95 to 100 in the polls that I'm looking at. So that's a team from the Mountain West that Auburn should beat by several touchdowns. Then Penn State. Blake, this is a rematch of a game a year ago. I don't know if you remember that one, but that one went down to the wire in Happy Valley. Penn State won that, I think, 28-20. This should be one of the more interesting September games in the SEC this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like I said, it's I think just having it, that's where like it's interesting. I think it's good to have it there as like the third game, right? I feel like that's obviously better than it was the first game. Like I feel like you're still feeling pretty good about things. Like you said, not by any means not an easy maybe opener against Mercer, just given their potential. But yeah, I mean the Penn State game, it's a huge one. Like you talked about that game they had last season, and it's going to be. I mean, you kind of know what you're getting from Penn State, anyways. With James Franklin, you kind of understand what to expect with them, even though personnel changes as it does every year. But it's just I think you kind of know what to expect. So that's a big game too, right? I mean, leading into your first SEC game, and look, that's the other theme is like these 5 games, these first 5, they're all back to back to back, right? Like they're all just right there together. There's no bye, there's none of that. It's just you're playing all these back to back, and so this is kind of that one that really kind of catapults you into your SEC schedule. So.
While you were speaking about those games, Blake, I looked up Missouri because I'm thinking, I don't remember these teams playing in a long time. And sure enough, the last that I find was 2017, and Auburn won that one, I think, in going away fashion. And of course, 2017 was the best year Auburn's had of those last 5 years. So Missouri, a team that probably the worst team besides Vanderbilt in the SEC, checking in around 55 on the computer polls. That should be a little bit of a let up. No SEC team is, but relatively speaking, that's a little bit of the break before the next 6, which are just going to be brutal.
Yeah, I mean, let's pull it up again. Like this next group of games, it's just, I mean, and look, we'll scroll down. I mean, they're playing Alabama, but that's when you have Georgia and Alabama on the road, like you kind of know the challenges that's going to present itself in a season by itself, just having those 2 games on the road. But then when you do throw in, these couple games that they're going to have here on the road at an Ole Miss or Mississippi State, 2 teams, which I think you could also put in that category of right now, like I don't know what to expect from either one of those. But what I do know is that what you're going to get offensively, right, from both of those teams. They're going to present some challenges, even though they've got some things to figure out. And again, those are on the road. So I think that makes it a lot tougher. And then, oh, by the way, it's like, all right, well, it's not like your home games are just completely guaranteed either based on the schedule. We've already talked about Arkansas. Arkansas is very interesting. They're a team, I think, that's got a ton of potential to win a lot of games. And we know what the expectations are for Texas A&M. So, I mean, yeah, like it's just the more you look at this schedule, there's not a lot in here that you're just completely looking at. And that's why it goes back to what you said. And I thought the best point was that's where if you're Bryan Harsin, man, those first 5 games, because if you have all 5 of those games at home, and let's say they're 2-3 or something,
look out
for it. That's what I mean. Like it's just it can get ugly at that point. So yeah, I think that's the importance of those first 5 games, because when you look at the rest of the schedule, there's some tough ones in there. So,
okay, if you're listening as an Auburn fan, you want some good news right now. I don't know how much carryover there is year to year, but Auburn did beat LSU, Ole Miss, and Arkansas last year. So there's a little bit of history there with being able to overtake all those teams. I don't know if it carries over or not. There are potentially 8 top 25 teams on this schedule. All 3 of those teams would fit in there. Then that Mississippi State game, State did win that one last year in Auburn. This year that's on the road. And, of course, A&M, you get that one at home. And this is the portion of the season where, Blake, you have seen at Auburn, we talked about the roller coaster. A lot of that is, how do I put this? I guess self-inflicted program pressure when you are a couple hours away from what's been the preeminent college football program for the last 15 years. They're your bitter rival. Auburn has got a really good football program in history and tradition, but when you put it side by side to Alabama, that's where you start having issues with expectations. Again, Auburn last year ran off to a really good start, got some really good wins. I think we did power rankings last year. I believe I had Auburn number 3 or 4 in the conference after that Ole Miss win. Then the pressure kicks in, it falls apart. Auburn loses its last 5 games, including one to South Carolina that I don't think any of us saw coming. I say all that to say this, Blake. That's where the middle part of the schedule, I think, is going to make or break this team, and maybe the first part too. I mean, you get a loss in there, say to Penn State and LSU. You look at the rest of that schedule, the fans are going to be howling. Bryan Harsin had just one of the most unbelievable off seasons I've ever had a coach or ever seen a coach have. You look at the way Auburn ended the season last year. You've seen that at Auburn a few times. I think a lot of the last few games in how Auburn plays traditionally have been determined by, are you in a good spot? Were you feeling good about yourself? You think you've got a shot against Alabama? Or is it by mid-October, it's fire the coach, we should have made the move last year? And you've seen Auburn just crumble under that pressure in seasons past, or it gets through it and it thrives and it's, maybe an SEC West contender by the end of the year. So I think that's what makes, among other things, this schedule very interesting, because I think how the middle part goes, momentum is going to be very important one way or other for Auburn and for Bryan Harsin.
Well, let's be honest too. I mean, you just look at it from a number standpoint, it's still a schedule where you only have 4 road games.
Yeah.
So I mean, and they're tough. All of them are, but that's still okay. Like, right, you'll still take that, versus some of the alternatives. So that is something I think Auburn has going for it here. When you look at it that way, is no, you're not. I don't think they're going to be favored in every home game they played, but as of right now, they probably wouldn't be favored in A&M, those kind of games. But still, you'd much rather have those games at Jordan Hare versus on the road. And so I think that's something too. If you want to be kind of optimistic about the possibilities, it's you're still only going on the road 4 times during the season. And as we said, the first one of those is not till October 8th. You kind of have that stretch in the middle, like you said. That's a big stretch, but I still think it's how those first 5 games play out. We're not saying anything people don't know. I mean, that's going to determine a lot, because that is like I said, I think 4-1, you're probably thrilled about 4-1 in those first 5. 5-0, my goodness, like you're sitting pretty. 3-2, probably going to be a little upset because, maybe that's Penn State, LSU, those kind of games. But I think how we see them play in those first 5 games, I think that'll tell us a lot about kind of what that preparation and what the expectations should be for them going into that stretch of games the rest of the way. Because like we said, there's not much let up the rest of the way. So,
well, the last 2 games on the schedule, Western Kentucky, that one is in Auburn. Western, a team that had a tremendous offensive improvement last year, scored a ton of points. So they figured to be interesting on that side of the ball. And then at Alabama, which, even though this program has had its downturns the last few years, still beating Alabama 2 of the last 5 times it's played. And not a lot of teams can say that, Blake, if any.
Yeah. If you win that one, a lot is forgiven. So
if you win that one, Harsin gets a 10-year contract and all is forgiven, right?
As long as you're not over heading into that one, a lot could be forgiven if you win that one. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a challenge. But like we said, it just seems like those games are always just, we pointed that out before, I think, when we did the Alabama schedule. Those games are just always something. You're going to get something entertaining out of it. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But it is. I think it's again, I haven't looked at every schedule yet, but this is one of the more fascinating ones, just because I think of all the possibilities of how many directions this thing could go in. And yeah, it is like, you're talking about it from a betting standpoint right now, and you're having to pick that number on what you think Auburn could hit from like a win total standpoint, which we'll talk about all that stuff getting closer to the season. But I don't know what I'd set that number at right now. Like, it's, when you look at this schedule, I think it's just, man, there's a lot of possibilities. So
Okay, let's do it off the cuff real quickly. Okay, Auburn is going to be favored against Mercer and San Jose State. Is Auburn a favorite at home against Penn State? Or is that a pick 'em?
I mean, I feel like right now Penn State's probably the higher rated team. Are they not?
They are, but it's home.
Well, then I think it's close. Like, yeah, I think it's take your pick on that one. We can do that.
Let's give Penn State the favorite in this one. If we've got another toss up, we'll give that to Auburn.
Sure.
So Auburn's going to be expected 2-1 at that point. Missouri going to be favored 3-1. LSU at home, Auburn's going to be favored. That's 4-1 at Georgia. That'll be a loss in terms of expectations. 4-2 at Ole Miss, probably the same thing. So that's 4-3. Arkansas at home. Since we gave the first one to Penn State, I think this, again, a toss-up. We probably give this to Auburn.
I think like these 3 games, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Mississippi State, I think that's where you just kind of – I think it's a while. I think you just pick one. Like, just pick games to lose, pick a record, like, because I think those 3 are all – I don't know. So
that's probably 5-3 at that point. At Mississippi State, maybe a slight underdog on the road. That's 5-4. A&M. Probably a slight underdog. That's 5-5. Western Kentucky, they'll be favored. That's 6-5. And then at Alabama, that'll be certainly Alabama will be favored in that one. So that's probably looking at it through in terms of who's favored or not. Probably 6-6. Which, not that Auburn can't do better. We're not saying that, but if that's how it plays out, that's not going to be a happy fan base at the end of the season. So even though those are brutal teams Auburn is playing.
If we set it at 6, the win total, I would go over because I think there's more possible. I think that's what I would do. But like we said, we'll get into all that stuff. But this is just kind of, it is an interesting one. And I know Auburn fans have looked at the schedule a lot, and there will be a lot of different opinions on this. But yeah, man, it's I think it's your expectations, personnel, the Harsin, just everything. And I think we've moved past that at this point. But I also think, like we said, there's so much that can happen in those first 5 games, that can kind of bring some of that stuff back into the forefront. And so, yeah, we have to make our picks at some point. So I'm glad we're not doing it today.
Yeah, you and I both. Well, that'll be one of the tougher schedules in the country. I'm pulling up Phil Steele's 2022's toughest schedules. Guess where Auburn ranks?
Got to be up there.
Number 1.
Ah, there you go.
So, yes,
it is. We weren't lying, so there you go.
It looked like a brutal schedule as we did this. I didn't know that. I looked that up.
My Phil Steele, I just got the notification that mine just arrived in the mailbox. So if I'd had that in front of me, we could have pointed that out as well. So.
Well, I had to make a road trip to Denver to get mine. So that's how dedicated we are here. I'm doing this podcast in the Denver area with my Phil Steele that you still don't have. So
it's in the mailbox. I've just got to make the trek out there, which recently that's doesn't sound that fun, but yeah.
No, Blake's playing hurt here at the 14th. But anyway, any parting thoughts, Blake?
No. Yeah. So take everything we just said the first 17 minutes and realize that it's a tough schedule. So we're not sliding Auburn wins or anything, but it's a tough schedule. So
we have more schedule previews coming up. I believe we've done 3 SEC teams, maybe 4. We will get to them all within the next couple of weeks. I'm going to have an SEC West draft preview coming up. We did one on the East. We'll do one on the West too. The draft is coming up on Sunday. That's always interesting. Lots of other stuff coming up at the 14. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you would, please, and we will see you really soon.